It is the morning sports desk on a Wednesday, the 10th of July. I'm CJ Baumgartner, Corey Tackman, and Zeke all joining us here. And Zeke, we're going to let you kind of intro our special guest here today.
Yeah, very special guest joining us on the morning sports desk today was the TV broadcast booth for the Twins for 40 years, witnessed a whole bunch of fun stuff, including many a Hall of Fame career, joined on the phone this morning by Dick Bremer. Dick, how are you this morning?
We're doing fine, enjoying a wet summer. I didn't know. Does it rain like this every summer in Minnesota? I've been gone so much over the last 40 years.
I think it's kind of an anomaly here, but it was a good time to step out of the booth maybe because like last night, all these rainouts that we've had, you get to enjoy a little bit more summer, right?
Yeah, it's been great. It was really weird though. I'll have to confess on the 4th of July because I think I've been at a major league ballpark, Metrodome, Target Field, wherever on the road on the 4th of July for, well, certainly most of my life. So that was not the case this year. And I finally got to enjoy what everybody else enjoys on a summertime holiday.
All right. Awesome. And all right, we'll dive into some Joe Mauer questions here. That's the big thing, obviously, coming up next weekend. Joe Mauer being a first ballot Hall of Famer, Dick, obviously, it wasn't a surprise to a lot of us in Twins territory, but as that voter list trickled out and the names kind of came through and it looked like Joe Mauer was going to get there, I know you view him as a first ballot Hall of Famer, but were you surprised that the voters looked so favorably on Joe on his first attempt?
Well, I wasn't, only because of my only experience. Now, I saw him play a lot, almost every one of his games, every one of his at-bats and hits and all that, right? But for some reason, and I asked Justin Morneau about this too. I don't know why it was, but I had a greater appreciation for Joe after he was done playing. And I think the simple explanation is he spoiled a lot of us. He won the first batting title for a catcher in the American League ever. And then he won 2 more, and he won Gold Gloves and league MVP and all that. And for some reason, maybe it's because of the vacuum he left behind, not just with the Twins, but across baseball, when he went out, to first base and then ended his career. But when he went out from behind home plate, it just seemed like, my gosh, look what we were privileged to watch for so many years. And so I think maybe that, the voters, and I don't have a ballot, but I think the voters probably experienced some of the same thing to some degree anyway. And that was why it was so delightful that he got in on the first ballot, and it's going to make for a very special time for him and his family and his friends in Cooperstown here in just a short matter of time.
He was such an unbelievable story, and there was so much hype around him coming out of high school, being the Minnesota kid with all of this potential. Do you remember a time early in his career? Was there a specific moment for you, Dick, where the ability caught up to the hype of Joe Mauer, where you thought to yourself, my goodness gracious, we got this guy for hopefully a really long time, and this could be something special?
Well, sports fans are used to being disappointed with, number 1 picks, first-round picks, regardless of what the sport is. And here was Joe with all the hype, as you mentioned. And I'd never seen him play in high school in any sport. But I do remember his first spring training camp in Fort Myers, Florida. And we weren't broadcasting that game, but I was there in the seats watching. And he was in the starting lineup, and this was kind of a big deal, right? It was not a coming out party or anything like that, but this was the first time he was going to be starting a game with, albeit a spring training, major league starting lineup. And Roy Halladay was the pitcher. Now, at the time, Roy Halladay was probably the best pitcher in the league. I believe he was with the Toronto at the time, could have been Philadelphia. But he was still at the very top of his game in what would be a Hall of Fame career for him. So I thought, well, this will be a good test. We'll see how this kid does against Roy Halladay, the best there is in the game. And in his first at-bat, Halladay followed through and saw a line drive go over his right shoulder. And then in his next at-bat, Mauer's next at-bat, Halladay delivered a pitch and saw a line drive go over his left shoulder. And it was like, okay, this kid might have a chance here, and he's got a real good opportunity to be a fixture and kind of prove to everybody, or at least to me, that the hype wasn't exaggerated.
Dick, you got to witness Joe's entire career from that first game against Cleveland in 2004 to the last one against Chicago in 2018. Is there one particular Joe Mauer moment that stands out to you?
Well, he got to Cooperstown, or will be inducted into Cooperstown, mostly because of his hitting, having won 3 batting titles as a catcher, something that had never been done in the American League before. But the play that stands out was actually a defensive play at Yankee Stadium. I forget the minor details, but Brett Gardner, who at the time was one of the fastest guys in baseball, was at second base. And there was a play between the plate and the mound at Yankee Stadium. And Mauer ended up retrieving, and I don't remember whether it was a chopper, whether it was a bunt, whether it was a throw that got away, but he picked it up equidistant between home plate and the mound and bluffed a throw to first base. And that got Gardner convinced that he would be able to score. And what we saw after that was one of the most athletic plays any catcher has ever made. He reversed course, lunged back as Gardner was sliding in, and he got him out. And it's a play that I've watched. It's on YouTube. It's a play that I've watched many times, just to marvel at the athleticism of this young man when he was winning Gold Gloves and batting championships. I guess that's the play that stands out the most.
And, Joe Mauer was a part of a great core that the Twins had with Morneau and Torrey Hunter and a few of those other guys in those 2000s Twins teams. Now the Twins have a good combination of veterans and prospects coming up. To me, they kind of remind me of that same core. Do you kind of see this current team that the Twins have right now with all these prospects coming up and the veterans they have in place like those early 2000s teams? Or do you kind of have a different view of what this group could be capable of with the current Twins team?
Well, yeah, back then, though, as you remember, they got an opportunity to play because there wasn't a veteran core that was in place at the time. What we're seeing now, last year, Julian, Wallner, Varland, they were rookies coming in to a veteran team that ended up winning the division. And now we're seeing it this year. Simeon Woods Richardson, Wallner's come back, Brooks Lee, Lewis when he's healthy. These guys are contributing to a really good baseball team, but they've got a veteran nucleus, Correa, Buxton, Kepler, guys like that. So it's a little bit of a different situation, but the infusion of talent is there, and it should make this Twins team really fun to watch for quite a few years.
There's some interesting similarities, I think, and we talk about Joe, and we know Joe in his career dealt with some injuries from time to time that in the moment, it sometimes felt like, boy, this is really putting into question what he could really be. Obviously, he gets the Hall of Fame induction. We know what it means in hindsight, but this current team has some guys who, when they're out on the field, their output is kind of undeniable, right? You Byron Buxton and Royce Lewis, and what they do on the field, it's impressive. It would be an understatement. I know professionally, you have to stay positive. But one of the things we always liked about you, Dick, as a broadcaster, is you're a Minnesotan, the classic one of us situation. As a fan, how do you stay patient in those times? And I'm asking for advice because this is the thing that I struggle with all the time when I watch the Twins. Man, I just I want so badly for this thing to work out with Buxton and Royce Lewis. And it's defeating sometimes,
Well, I think one of the things that helped me over the years is when I started with the Twins back in the early 80s, they weren't on anybody's radar screen. Fans didn't care. We televised games, and I'm not sure we have ever had any appreciable audience at all. And the team, I started in 1983, the team was coming off a season where they lost 102 ball games. And so the expectations when I started were really low. And so maybe that helped me over the years when the teams would, they'd have the ebb and flow of being a good 1 year and then a couple of years later being really bad. And the thing I always reminded myself of was the fact that if somebody is making the decision, and even back then, 80s, 90s, into the millennium and all that, people have a lot of different options. And if they choose to watch you or listen to you, given all the options that are out there, well, you're obligated then to be engaged in what's happening in the game, being on top of your game as a broadcaster, and doing the very best you can to essentially reward the viewers or listeners for choosing to spend their time with you.
Dick, the Twins are 52 wins this morning, doubleheader in Chicago coming up later today. 5.5 games behind Cleveland for first place. Are they meeting your expectations on where you thought they'd be at this point in the season with 5 games left before the All-Star break?
Yeah, but you know, it's all skewed, right? Because they've got a team, maybe the surprise team in baseball, the Cleveland Guardians, ahead of them by 5.5 games. But yeah, right now they're on a pace to win 92 ball games, I guess, and that's about where I thought they'd settle in. They've had some issues. The first few weeks were terrible, not good at all. But since then, they've got the best record in the American League, and that's what I kind of expected from this team this year. They've had some players underperforming, but they've had this infusion of talent, like Brooks Lee. So they're about where they are, but I don't think anybody in baseball had the Cleveland Guardians with the third best record in Major League Baseball right now.
boy, is that the truth. We've been spending a lot of time obviously talking about Joe Mauer, and Joe Mauer fits this bill of maybe like one of the twinsiest twins of all time, if I'm allowed to use that term. Minnesota guy, representative of the state, of the ball club. Obviously, Tony Oliva is one of the all-time great representatives. Who, in your opinion, doesn't get enough credit for being like an unbelievable representative of what it is to be a Minnesota Twin?
Well, I always thought Kent Herbeck was maybe at the top of my list, only because he loved baseball, he loved hunting, he loved fishing. He was kind of a slice of Minnesota, with his interests. In terms of residency, he's lived his entire life in Minnesota. But you mentioned some guys, Mauer, Tony Oliva obviously didn't spend his entire life here, but he has been one of the greatest ambassadors for the game of baseball there ever was. I think it speaks to the people that we've mentioned, but also the region. I think, this fan base here tends to appreciate genuine people, and people who are real, and people who are, true to themselves and to each other. And those guys have done that. And more recently now, Mauer, just imagine the pressure of being so highly touted, hyped, I think was the word you used, to be that guy. And it wasn't like he was hyped having grown up in Minnesota and, he was, drafted and signed by the Seattle Mariners. He was playing at home, and the pressure of performing in front of friends and relatives and a fan base that, for better or not, fans tend to be skeptical, cynical, all of that. And he performed, and he went into the Hall of Fame, is going into the Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And I don't think many people athletically could do what Joe did, remembering that in high school he was an elite 3-sport star. I don't think we'll ever see that again in the way society is now. You've got to specialize when you're in 5th grade almost if you want to excel in any one of those sports.
Dick, you mentioned some of the
coming out of high school and all that. It's just remarkable what he's been able to do.
Yeah.
Dick, you mentioned some of the great ambassadors to baseball. You mentioned Tony Oliva and Kent Herbeck, but one of a very influential guy in Twins history, we're kind of seeing it now with this next generation of Hall of Famers. David Ortiz mentioned him in his Hall of Fame speech, and it's why he wore number 34 in Boston, and that's Kirby Puckett. And Kirby there in the early days of Mauer's career. One of my favorite stories you tell, and speaking of ambassadors to baseball, Twins Fest is a huge deal every off season. And I don't think Corey and CJ have heard the story of when you were on the road for Twins Fest with Kirby Puckett, and you were going through Pelican Rapids and decided to pay your parents a visit. Can you tell that story real quick?
Well, yeah, and this was long ago, obviously, and there weren't cell phones, so I couldn't alert my parents that we were coming, and I wanted it to be a surprise. They were living in a senior citizens high-rise apartment in Pelican Rapids, and so I wanted it to be a surprise, but I had no idea whether they were even going to be there. So we pull in with a van in front of the building. We go upstairs, and I had Kirby knock on my parents' door in the apartment. And my mother answered and was so starstruck, as my father was to a lesser degree. I swear it took him 10 minutes to even acknowledge that I was with Kirby at the time. And so we stayed for about 15 minutes. Kirby was nice enough to sign a baseball to them, for them. And then Kirby, before we left, asked to use the bathroom. And my mother told that story so many times. One of her friends, I think in part to kind of shut her up, crocheted a bath towel that says Kirby Puckett peed here.
One of the reasons we were excited to talk to you today, Dick, was obviously Joe Mauer, talk a little Twins, but we're fortunate enough here at the radio station, we get to call a lot of games as well. So I've got a play-by-play question I wanted to throw your way. And, it's not just a typical like highlight call. What was the favorite call from your career, but a more specific, like, was there a call that comes to mind when your like specific knowledge of the team, of the situation, because you'd been around them, because you'd seen them enough, where what was happening on the field like completely played out in the scenario that you happened to be talking about at the time, right? Where like maybe a player was starting to get hot and ends up hitting a home run, or is there a scenario like that that comes to mind from your play-by-play career?
Well, there's some calls that stand out. I made a decision very early in my career to not have a home run call. Figuring that if I was lucky enough to do this for a while, I'd be seeing a lot of home runs. They'd all be different. So why would I try to make them all sound the same? Now, that doesn't mean that some announcers haven't had some good home run calls, but that was never my style, because I thought that kind of put the announcer's signature on something he had absolutely nothing to do with.
Sure.
So I tried to make all the home run calls different. There was one, Justin Morneau, who, of course, I later worked with for several years on the air, but he's in Chicago, and he hit the first 3 home run game the Twins had hit since 1973. And, of course, Justin from Canada, big hockey fan, and I think I said something like, and the hockey player has a hat trick when he hit his 3rd home run.
Sure.
Something that was specific to him hitting that home run. So I tried to do that, to not make it repetitious at all. In terms of games, the most significant game I ever called, and you have to remember now, I was a local TV guy, so when the team got into the playoffs in the World Series, I just became a fan. I didn't get to work any of the postseason. So the most significant game I ever did was the last home game of 1987. And the Twins hadn't been in the playoffs since 1970. And they, almost moved. They almost disappeared on everybody's radar screen. And just 5 years after that dreadful 102-loss season. But in the last home game of 1987, they clinched a tie with a week left in the season. And that was a very special game for me, because that meant so much to the franchise and to the region. They ended up clinching the next day in Texas. And then, the entire 5-state region was enraptured by this baseball team because they got to the postseason and, of course, won the World Series that year. So that was probably the most significant game that I ever called.
Cool.
we've been talking about some homegrown talent coming up through the Twin system and stuff. And one name we have to mention is making some big headlines there tonight, and that's Marnie Gellner, who started as kind of the sideline analyst with the Twins and becoming the first woman in Twins history to call a game on TV. Did it against the White Sox, I think, in that series opener. Tell us a little bit about Marnie Gellner and kind of her development as a broadcaster.
Well, I mean, this is the ultimate compliment, and it's not true in every case. What you see and hear on the air is the real deal. The greatest compliment anybody's ever paid me is that they could tell I was genuine on the air. Marnie is genuine on the air, and she's an absolute delight to anybody who's worked with her and gotten to know her. And because she's such a warm-hearted, great personality, we did something with Marnie that I very fondly remember, and she does too. And this was, 10 years ago. Brad Ausmus was managing the Tigers, and for whatever reason, he decided he was going to have one of his players, Romine, play every position in every game. Well, first of all, that's a gimmick. If you like gimmicks, you do it at home. You don't do it on the road. And so we sat around the dinner table on Friday and decided, I think it was Friday, and decided this was one of the silliest things I'd ever seen or heard in my life. And we were sitting around the table, and before you knew it, we decided we would do the same thing with Marnie. And I think it was a Sunday afternoon, that she was the perfect person to pull it off. And she would do her sideline reporting gig one inning. She would be a producer in the truck for one inning. She would do play-by-play for an inning, analysis for an inning. Audio. We had her do 9 different things within a telecast, and it was a Sunday afternoon, as I recall, and unfortunately not many people watched it because the Vikings were playing. But that was such a wonderful, unique broadcast, one of the favorite ones of the nearly 5,000 that I did. And Marnie was a big reason that it was pulled off so well, because she was the one person who could do that and have fun doing it. And it's one of my favorite broadcasts of all time.
Awesome. Great. And, as we kind of start to wrap things up here, Dick, I just want to know, kind of circling all the way back to Staples, what are some of your best memories when you were a high school athlete in central Minnesota? And are there any kind of fields or gyms or just any kind of places that you played that really stood out to you in your time?
Well, I was a decent baseball player. Wasn't very good in basketball, but I did end up starting my senior year. So I don't have any really personal highlights. I think, finished third in our district in basketball, and I had a game where I threw a shutout against Crosby Ironton and all that. So, when you have a modest athletic career, you tend to remember things that really weren't all that extraordinary. But what I remember most is that I was able to play. I was able to pitch. I'd never pitched before. And I go back to when we moved there in 1971, and I met the coach, Jerry Reaver, a legend in that region. Before I ever enrolled in class, he invited me to come along on the spring trip to Stillwater. So I actually played baseball. Now, this was B squad. I was just a freshman. But I actually played baseball for Staples before I ever went to a class. And I'm sure the Minnesota State High School League has to have some rule against that, but I pulled it off. But I remember, too, in the games that we would travel, not so much baseball, but I remember basketball. KWAD broadcast our games, and the broadcaster's name, I remember, Lynn Thornton.
Sure.
And that was a long, long time ago, and I don't know whether Lynn is even still with us, but I remember it was a pretty big deal for the players, not just me, to have their games broadcast, never imagining that at some point later, not that long after that, I would be one of those broadcasters.
Dick, Hall of Fame weekend's coming up next weekend. A lot of Twins fans going to be out there. I was out there for Tony and Jim and David when they all got in 2 years ago. And you've been out there many, many times as well for broadcast partners and guys that you've watched growing up. For any first-time Twins fans going to Cooperstown, what are some must-visit places to go to while they're out there?
Well, the city is just such a charming city, even with the flood of people that come in on induction weekend. And I have been checking the forecast daily. It's not going to be unreasonably hot and humid for a change. But I would encourage fans who might be going out there during an induction weekend to just walk around. You can be walking down the street and, oh, there's Johnny Bench. Oh, there's Wade Boggs. Things like that. And it's like, and of course they're in street clothes and they're doing autograph signings or what have you. But, where in the world can you go and just wanting to go get, some popcorn and a Coke or Pepsi or a beer or something like that, and you're on your way to go get that. Oh my goodness. Well, look at there. There's Adrian Beltre or whomever. They're just walking around, and it's just a delightful place to be, to the point where I am going for Joe's induction. It will be my 4th induction that I've gone to. And, hey, now that I'm retired, as much fun as I have there, I might go back every year, whether there's a twin involved or not.
Speaking of retirement, Dick, we just to keep this on your radar for the fall, on KNSP out of Staples, we do a Cardinal football game every single week and a basketball game throughout the winter season. So if you're ever not doing anything, consider this your open invite to join us on one of those broadcasts. All right.
Well, I do appreciate that. That would be a kick. But I'm retired for a reason. I went to a St. Cloud Rocks game a few weeks ago, and before I knew it, I was up in the booth, and the guy asked me if I wanted to do play-by-play. I said, no, I'm retired. So I think I've done my last sporting event, unless something overwhelming comes along. But I appreciate the invitation.
What if I tell you my favorite fishing hole? Then can we work something out?
After we go fishing and you prove it, maybe we can work something out.
Dick Bremer joining us on the morning sports desk, answering all of our questions here. Dick, we appreciate the time that you've given us. It's awesome to get to chat with you, and best of luck coming up this weekend, and we'll chat at you next time.
All right. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
And that was Dick Bremer with the Minnesota Twins, kind enough to join us on the morning sports desk, and very excited to head out to Cooperstown. I ran into Dick and his family out there 2 years ago. They were out there for Tony Oliva and Jim Cott and David Ortiz, and I was out there doing some coverage out there. And we'll have very similar coverage on the Superstation and KNSP and KWAD as well, for Joe Mauer's Hall of Fame induction weekend. We're leaving next week, and it's an incredible experience. Like what Dick mentioned is you just walk down the street, and it's kind of like if they put the Baseball Hall of Fame in a town the size of Monaga. Is kind of what it's like going to Cooperstown, where it's in the middle of nowhere. You're driving 90 minutes from Syracuse or an hour from Albany to get there, and you're like, I'm lost. I'm going to get abducted by some hillbillies or something, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're in Cooperstown, and it's got one big main street, and the museum's up here on the hill, and you've got all these little shops and restaurants and stuff, and like he said, I was in the Cooperstown gift shop last time I was out there looking for some souvenirs, and Burt Blyleven walks by. And I was like, I should go interview Burt Blyleven quick, because that's what he wants to do while he's souvenir shopping in Cooperstown, is talk to this small town radio guy who wants to ask him some questions. So I picked up all my nerves and I walked over to Burt Blyleven. I'm like, hey, Burt, Zeke Foreman from Minnesota. We're working on some Cooperstown coverage stuff. Could I ask you a couple questions about Jim Cott and how he helped you come along as a player? And he looked at me and said, nope, I don't want to. And I was like, all right, sir, thanks for your time. And I walked away, and Bert's wife, Gail, was standing there, and she lectured him in the gift shop. Bert, you talk to that young man. And it was the most terrifying 2-minute interview I've ever done in my life. But I got some great audio from Bert talking about Tony Oliva and Jim Cott in the playing days back in the he wasn't disgruntled through it. He actually played along. It's awesome. He faked it very well, but he was happy to be there. We'll say that.
I'm surprised he didn't tell Bremer that story.
Maybe.
I should have. Yeah. Yeah, he's got some good Burt Blyleven stories too. But yeah, very excited. We'll do some live call-ins to check in and some Facebook posts, and it's going to be a blast because the Twins fans traveled to Cooperstown very well for Jim and Tony and even David Ortiz a handful of years ago, and I imagine the same amount of Twins fans, if not even more, will be out in New York to celebrate Joe Mauer, and along with Todd Helton, Jim Leland, and Adrian Beltre and their accomplishments over their Hall of Fame careers in the major leagues.
Well, and I think what makes this Hall of Fame so interesting for Twins fans, I mean, obviously it's Joe Mauer, and as we talked about, local guy, Hall of Famer, catcher, batting titles, everything. But I think it's the fact that he's the first Twin of the 2000s generation to make the Hall of Fame. So there's a whole new group of fans who have never seen their favorite player growing up make it to the Hall of Fame. Tony Oliva, Jim Codd, like all those guys are great baseball players. But for somebody my age, they're like myths because they played so long ago. To have a guy that you saw play every single day get into the Hall of Fame, it's, for me personally, it's a different level. I'm really excited to see what this weekend brings, or the next weekend brings.
It's an interesting distinction you made there also, because Tony Oliva makes it, Burt Blyleven makes it, Jim Cott makes it roughly a combined 6 million years after they were done playing. So for
Jack
most,
Morris, another guy like that too. Yeah.
Exactly. Where we've grown accustomed to knowing that it will happen when it happens, but it's just not going to be. We got the instant gratification of being able to see Joe Mauer play what feels like a mere 3 years ago, and he's already in it. And the first time around, and we've all talked about it kind of personally just up here in the building, and I think we all felt like this guy absolutely needs to be in right away. There's just no way it's going to happen. And then the fact that it did, we got to have our cake and eat it too in the situation. It's a rare circumstance for being a Twins fan.
It's a rare circumstance in general, because I think you look at first ballot Hall of Fame. I love talking Hall of Fame. I love Hall of Fame numbers and stats and things like that. I mean, you look at first ballot Hall of Famers for the Twins. You've got Kirby. I think Dave Winfield got in on his first attempt in the same class as Kirby, but he was a Twin for just for the end there. Rod Carew got in on his first attempt, and that may be it. Harmon was on the ballot for 4 years before he got in the Hall of Fame, which just blows my mind nowadays. Tony had to get in with the Veterans Committee. Burt Blyleven got in his final year of eligibility. Jack Morris, I don't remember if he was a Veterans Committee guy or if he was on his 14th year.
I think it was the time.
Yeah, and so all these guys, Twins guys specifically, usually have to wait a very long time. And for Joe, only 3 catchers have been voted in on their first ballot: Johnny Bench, Pudge Rodriguez, and Joe Mauer. Mm-hmm. And that's the list of first ballot catchers. And so it's a very rarefied air that he's in. And we've seen a couple guys. It sucks getting old. And so all the guys that you watched in high school and stuff getting into the Hall of Fame. Jim Thome, another guy, a Twin for a couple of years. He was a first ballot Hall of Famer. And I was like, oh, sweet, Jim Thome is in. Maybe this might be the last time that I see a Twin get in. And then Joe Mauer comes in. And you mentioned CJ kind of watching the ballots trickle in. And he's hovering right around that 82%. And he needs 75% of the vote to get into the Hall of Fame. And he's kind of trickling in with 50% of the ballots. And then more ballots pour in. He's down to 79%, and it's him and Billy Wagner right on the cusp. Beltre is going to get in. He was in the upper 90s. Todd Helton was up there too. Like, okay, is Joe Mauer going to get in? And then he gets, I think it was like 76.1% or just barely by the skin of his teeth getting in. And just the overwhelming sense of relief that, okay, the baseball writers of America appreciate Joe Mauer. They're not going to look at, the last 5 years at first base, underwhelming stats for what you would expect from a first baseman, but just his first 10, 11 years in the league, just so dominant at that catcher position. 3 batting titles, all-star appearances, MVP, and just having Joe Mauer be appreciated by the national media felt so good last January.
It makes what everybody's random uncle who talked about Joe Mauer halfway through a Twins game said kind of feel irrelevant, huh? Everybody's got that one person's like, Mauer sucked. He didn't do this, that.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had some people who thought he was pretty good, which it is fascinating. Zeke, one more question, then I think we'll wrap it up for the day. Since you love the Hall of Fame, are you a big hall guy or a small hall guy?
Big hall or small hall, meaning
Like, are you one when a Hall of Fame ballot comes around? Are you like, man, I'm pretty loose? Or are you like, no, it's got to be like the best of the best?
The best of the best. I'm excited for the Hall of Fame speeches because there's only 4 guys getting in this time. I'm going to look up the Hall of Fame class from 2022 because it was like 8 dudes.
And some years it's like we got nobody in the Hall of Fame this year.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you get none. Sometimes you get a whole bunch. Let me look it up here. And it was a bunch of older guys here too. Let me see. Baseball Hall of Fame induction class of 2022.
Well, you look that up. Let me throw my insight into this. Starting to compare across eras, especially now in baseball, the way the game is played compared to the way it was even 10 years ago or 30 years ago. Like basketball, it's becoming harder and harder to compare across eras. And so what's really important, I think, is big hall, small hall, whatever, were you one of the premier players of your generation? And if you were, you belong in. And by the way, I think that includes some pretty strong opinions on steroid era stuff. It was an era of baseball that exists. And so to me, those guys need to be in. That's just kind of my approach on it. But if there's an era of baseball that is like, it's like a dead ball era, right? Or things just aren't that exhilarating. I don't think you can compare that era to any of the other, what happened in the 20s or what's happening in the 2020s 100 years later. Yeah. Were you the premier player in your generation? Were you the guy when teams showed up to like, if we can contain that guy, we're going to be okay? That to me is the qualifier for a Hall of Fame.
Yeah, there were 7 inductees in 2022. Bud Fowler is a pioneer, which Dave Winfield gave Bud Fowler's induction speech, and it was fantastic. Gil Hodges, longtime Dodger, Jim Cott, Minnie Minoso got in, Tony Oliva, Buck O'Neill is a pioneer, and David Ortiz. So 7 dudes that year, only 4 this year. I think I'm with the small hall, and it's gonna be tough these next handful of years because with getting older, I mean, these are all guys that I grew up watching, and you still got some of the steroid era guys on there looking to get into the Hall of Fame. Clemens and Bonds and Sosa have all dropped off now at this point, but you still have guys like a Manny Ramirez, and Alex Rodriguez and guys like that who were just absolutely dominant at that point. But you've got some fringe guys in there too. I mentioned Pudge Rodriguez before. Did he or did he not use steroids? Jeff Bagwell, did he or did he not use steroids? David Ortiz, did he or did he not use steroids? And so there's a lot of question marks with some guys who did get in, guys who didn't just fully admit, like an A-Rod, like a Bonds, yes, I use performance-enhancing drugs or whatever. But these next handful of ballots, I mean, Ichiro is going to be on the ballot next year. That is going to be a zoo because Dominican love their baseball players. David Ortiz, Cooperstown was like Dominican Republic Junior last year or 2 years ago. It was ridiculous. And this year with Adrian Beltre getting in, it's going to be awesome there too. But the Japanese media coming in for Ichiro next year, who if Ichiro doesn't get 100% of the vote, I'm done with baseball.
There's going to be one voter out there who's going to do it.
Yeah, who was it that didn't vote for Jeter? It was Lavelli Neal didn't vote for Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
He was unanimous by one vote. Yeah, they don't appreciate Lavelli Neal in New York like a lot of us do here in Minnesota. But the Japanese media is just going to take Cooperstown by storm next year when Ichiro gets in, and it's going to be fun. And it's those kinds of names now of guys that we watched growing up that are going to start getting in. And is this guy worthy of a Hall of Fame nod or not? So this is when the Hall of Fame is going to start getting really, really fun for our generation, is when players that we know and watched for 10, 15 years growing up are kind of knocking on the door of Cooperstown, New York.
I'm glad you brought that up, and this will be my last point, because that was a thing that happened with Joe Mauer in particular that really struck me that I wasn't expecting to feel was I'm a dad now. And we're all dads now. And I loved baseball. I loved sports growing up, and I loved watching games with my dad and asking him about when the Twins would cart in some old guy into the broadcast booth and asking my dad about that player. Did you get to see that guy play? What was that like? And just being enamored by the Paul Bunyan-esque tall tales that exist around these guys. And I'm a little older than you guys, so I have, and maybe Zeke you do, but like I have some specific memories of Kirby Puckett. Kirby Puckett is my first favorite Twin ever, but Joe Mauer totally fits into this mold now of like, if my boys are going to grow up and love baseball, they're at some point going to ask me about Joe Mauer. It's just this really, there's a sentimentality about it that I was not expecting to feel about anything, that when Joe Mauer got in, I was like, oh my gosh, I could tell my kids about this guy someday. I cannot wait.
You get to be the living embodiment of that meme where it's a McMahon for the WWE. He's like, he was special. You get to be that guy when they say it, and you get to kind of like have a tear roll down your eyes. You look into the distance. It's great. And the one last thing, and then we'll wrap this up here, is with Joe Mauer, all great points, guys, people talk about the hits. He had just over 2,000 hits in his career. And maybe some people use that knock against him. He was a great hitter, but how come he didn't get all these hits? It's the era he played in towards the end is really tough. I think if you look at the projections, somebody did the math on this. If Juan Soto at his current pace, and he played baseball when he was like 19 years old, Major League Baseball, and is one of the best players in the game if Shohei Ohtani didn't exist. And if he played all the way till 38 at his current pace, he would not get to 3,000 hits. It's insane. Just this era of baseball. And I think that also helped Joe Mauer. And I think like Bremer just said it probably perfectly with Joe Mauer's Hall of Fame cases. That guy won 3 batting titles and an MVP and a bunch of Gold Gloves playing catcher. That's really hard. As you can see with some of the current Twins catchers and the Twins catchers after Mauer and catchers in baseball. It's
all catchers of all time. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah, there's a reason why all that was so special with Joe Mauer coming out. And in that age where Twins, it took a while for them to get in the Hall of Fame, but now you have media where Mauer got to be on the cover of MLB The Show 2 years in a row. Those commercials, the well-played Mauer. Those stick in my head for all time. It's great. And so all of that, I think, just kind of helped build his case a little bit. But
I still use Head and Shoulders because of Joe Mauer.
I still remember him making fun of Troy Polamalu. It was great. Yeah. This has been the Morning Sports Desk for Wednesday, July 10th. Once again, appreciate Dick Bremer.